In today's journey, I'm traveling to an island in the middle of Utah's deserts. I'm crossing the Great Salt Lake, which is the largest lake in the western United States. Though it looks fresh, this water is saltier than any of the oceans of the world. I'm hoping to see wildlife of any different kinds, but I'm particularly going out to find a life form that has been around for billions of years. I'm out here on the northernmost point of Antelope Island. This is an island in the middle of the desert. It's kind of a strange place to have an island. There's a lot of animals here that you would associate with the ocean, including many species of gulls. The California gull, which is the state bird of Utah. Now this island here is in front of the Great Salt Lake. Great Salt Lake is the biggest lake in the western United States. It's enormous, and it is so salty that you can float in it. You cannot drown in the Great Salt Lake. It's that buoyant, just like the Dead Sea over in the Middle East. It's the same kind of thing. The salinity is much higher than the ocean, so there's no ocean life that could live here. But the thing about this place is, it didn't used to be a salty lake. It used to be a much larger lake, an enormous lake called Lake Bonneville that was so huge that it covered most of the state of Utah, and it was over 1,000 feet deep. But towards the end of the Ice Age, about 9,000 or 10,000 years ago, a natural dam broke in Idaho and emptied the bulk of this lake out. And what was left is a lake that ends. It has no outlet. It doesn't outlet to the ocean. And so all the minerals that come down from the mountains every year, the salt just builds up. And when it evaporates, the salt stays. Evaporates more, the salt stays. And so you have this highly salty lake here. But we're going to explore around. We're going to take a look and see at some of the animals and some of the wildlife and some of the geological features here on this incredible location. Someone's done some rock art here on the edge of the lake. You know, throughout time, humans always want to figuratively depict. Humans want to express themselves, and they'll use whatever medium they have. They'll use charcoal on cave walls, they'll use paint, they'll use pigments, they'll carve, they'll etch. But here in the deserts, a lot of times, ever since my childhood, I've seen it. All along the salt flats and down the lake, people will do this. People will just take rocks, and they'll use the stark contrast of the rocks versus the flat landscape, and they'll just make some sort of thing like this. So I don't know who or why they did this, but one thing, I know they did it because they're human. Because to figuratively depict and artistically express is to be human. I'm down here along the edge of the Great Salt Lake, and there's this long ring of this dark brown material. This stuff right here. This is piles and piles of dead brine flies, and also their shed exoskeletons. Brine flies are an important part of the ecosystem. You know, it's March right now, but some of them have hatched, and I'm going to let you see a few of them in just a second. But brine flies live in this level all along the lake. They don't go further out, they don't go further in, and they feed specifically off of cyanobacteria. They don't bite you, but they'll be in this wall about 2-3 feet tall, running right along the whole rim of the lake. And to go out into the lake, you have to go through it, and you feel bajillions of these little guys bumping into you. When we look at this stuff right here, this mat is filled of biologically nutrient material. And you can see even now I got feathers. There's a feather breaking down in this. This stuff is gross and smells, it smells pretty nasty, but it's very nutritious. And as this gets through the ecosystem in this area, this helps the entire island because some of these nutrients make their way back up into the island itself. There's a lot of seabirds that live along here as well. There's a lot of gulls that will come down through, and they will just walk through and gulp up, these brine flies. In another month, these things are going to be everywhere. But these are the beginning of an ecosystem. These guys eat the cyanobacteria, the birds eat them, and then bigger animals eat the birds, and it goes through there, all from these brine flies on this edge. Look how much of this there is. This is nuts. All of this is dead brine flies. It's dead brine flies and dead brine fly exoskeletons. And again, there's so many feathers that are also part of this. So all of this right here goes on forever as dead brine flies. Then, from another time, all of this really light colored stuff, all of this is also dead brine flies. But it's just been sun bleached because it's from an earlier year. So you can see the lake has gone downhill. This is earlier, this is later. But you still, all along, have this bionutrient-rich mat all along the edge here. Here's more things going in to the organic pool here. This is a California gull. It might be a different species of gull. We have several species of gull here. But again, you can see it's laid down and it's died, and it's right here in the thick of all this dead brine trim. So again, this is taking what's just a salty dead lake and making biologically valuable organic decomposition. The real reason why I'm here today at Antelope Island is I want to see one of the most remarkable forms of life on the planet, and that is stromatolites. We're going to look for them, and we're going to find them, and we're going to teach you about them. These things might not look interesting, but your very existence is predicated on the fact that these life forms happen to exist. So we're going to see if we can find stromatolites, and we're going to learn about what they are. This is the wildest stuff. This is what makes this whole ecosystem work here. This is Cyanobacteria. We're going to talk about this stuff, but this is a very unique life form. It is photosynthetic, but it's not a plant, which means it converts solar energy into carbohydrates that it consumes. It does this, but it's not a plant. And it's reflecting back a lot of redshift light to us. We're going to talk about this life form, but stromatolites that we're looking for are a type of cyanobacteria that builds a skeleton. So this is just free-range cyanobacteria. There's all different species of bacteria in this lake, and this is where it all starts. So I know we're going to find what we're looking for, because I'm looking for stromatolites. These are dead stromatolites. And if you didn't recognize them at first, you might just think you're just looking at a rock. But you see these circles, and you see where they've broken off. You can see concentric rings. These were alive, but in the past couple of decades, the Great Salt Lake has gotten so low that now these are exposed and they're not alive anymore. And I can see right on the edge some living stromatolites. So we're going to go a little further and see if we can get a good shot. But it's interesting to see these were alive. These were living life forms, and they have now died. And again, you would walk over them and just think they're funny shaped rocks, or you might even mistake them for fossils where you see kind of these rings. You might mistake them for fossils, but these are stromatolites. All right, now it's time to tell you what stromatolites actually are. I've dragged you all the way out here. It's time to actually get into this. So first I'm going to tell you what they are, which might not sound very exciting to you at first. And then I'm going to tell you why we should all care about these life forms. So stromatolites. Stromatolites are a form of cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria are a very unique life form. They are not a plant, but they do photosynthesize. So what they do is they'll take in sunlight, and then they take in that water. They take in, hydrogen and oxygen is what you got. Water is made out of, right? Well, they will biologically separate the hydrogen from the oxygen, and they take the hydrogen and convert it into carbohydrates for their own food, and they'll even store it as well. So they're making food out of the hydrogen. What do they do with the oxygen? They off-gas it. Just like we breathe out we breathe out carbon dioxide, right? Okay, they're going to breathe out oxygen, which we all need. So these life forms are very unique and they're very delicate. Ironically, they like to live in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Shark Bay in Australia is one of the most famous sites for stromatolites. The Great Salt Lake here is another place. They usually like to be in environments that are so rich, so rich in salt that nothing else can really live there. And there's almost nothing that lives in this lake. It's basically the brine flies on the edge, there's some brine shrimp, and then in these areas where it's too briny, there's nothing, there's no life. Because life forms like to eat photosynthetic animals. So these bacteria would, if they were in a less saline-rich environment, they would get consumed, they would get hunted, but there's nothing that can live here, so they can thrive. Now, in the ancient times, during the Archean, which is about 3.7 billion years ago, is when we see these life forms originally coming about. This is one of the oldest life forms, and maybe the oldest. It's the oldest fossil record we have is of stromatolites. So during the Archean, this is a time period when the Earth had absolutely no atmosphere. It was just a dead planet, and it had volcanoes and was still being bombarded with asteroids and meteorites constantly that from the formation of the original solar system. So this is not an environment that is conducive to life, and yet we find that these life forms came about, and we find them in the fossil record. And we're going to take a look at some of these fossils, and we're going to see what they look like, and it's really fascinating when we see them. So what they did for us, though, the longest period of any life form like that ruled the Earth, we always say the age of the dinosaurs, right? No, the stromatolites ruled the Earth for billions of years. They did several things that were of vital importance to us. So what they did is when they off-gassed oxygen, they began to make an atmosphere. So of course we benefit from that today. Most of our atmosphere we have came from those original stromatolites. But having an atmosphere also protects us, because you have asteroids and meteorites every day. You go out any night, you go into a dark sky, you can see meteorites and asteroids hitting, and what happens? You see this streak of fire. It's because they're creating friction as they are hitting our atmosphere. They get hot, and they burn up, instead of slamming into us and destroying life on Earth. So having an atmosphere, look at the moon. By comparison, if you look at the moon is covered with craters. We have craters too from the early days, but anymore, it's pretty rare that a meteorite actually hits us. It's pretty rare that it makes it all the way here. And if it does, it burns down to something tiny. But during the Archean, there were full-size things just bombarding us. And having these stromatolites make us an atmosphere, that was the first thing they did to help. They made it so the rest of life could come about, but they also made it so we wouldn't get pummeled to pieces by these meteorites and asteroids. The next thing they do is they rusted the ocean. The ocean was filled with like liquidized and microscopic iron to levels and heavy metals that were not conducive to life. That if you had these levels today, life could not exist in these oceans. But as these stromatolites living on this edge in these shallow waters, shallow oceans, right on the edge, they off-gassed oxygen up. But what happens with iron, if iron and water and oxygen meet, you have rust. So this heavy metal iron floating through all these red oceans would rust and would sink to the bottom. And today, that is where we get most of our iron. The iron we use to make absolutely everything came from the rusting of the oceans during the Archean period. Absolutely fascinating. So they made the oceans habitable and able to have life spring forth, which everything is based off of the ocean, right? All life, is eventually attached to the ocean. They made the ocean livable to life by rusting it. They provided us with the modern iron we use today, and they gave us an atmosphere, so not only can we breathe, but it also protects us by having such a thick, dense atmosphere that most asteroids and meteorites do not make it all the way to the Earth. They get too hot, coming in the friction of that oxygen. We have stromatolites to thank for that. Now, as the oceans have gotten rusted, their stromatolites are more accessible to microcarnivores that want to eat them. And so you don't see stromatolites in many parts of the world. This here at the Great Salt Lake is one of the only places on the planet where you can see these remarkable life forms. So we want to take a look at some of these. We know there's some dead ones around here. We're going to see some live ones, and we want to take a look at what they're like. So I forgot to mention how stromatolites grow and what makes them different. I mentioned cyanobacteria. Cyanobacteria does its thing, and it grows. It can link together with other cyanobacteria, but it's just bacteria. It's free-floating bacteria. And it can form what they call algal blooms, even though it's not a true algae, where you have all this bright color that you can see even from above. But stromatolites are different. Stromatolites, as part of their bioprocess, they will make they'll make a chemical compound that will cement together. It'll excrete and cement together calcium carbonate, which is the same thing that our bones, we have bones are made out of calcium, coral's made out of calcium. So a lot of times people see stromatolites and think that it's coral, but it's not. It's a cyanobacteria, and it will build in sedimentary layers outward. A lot of times these look like little soggy mushrooms, especially the ones in Shark Bay, Australia. They look like little mushrooms homes, little gnome homes. But all of these things, they build layers, build layers, build layers, and that gives stability. So if you have ocean currents blasting back and forth, that prevents them from getting washed away or washing out into waters where other small predators might eat them. And so they're working together in a community. But what happens is only the outer layer is alive. And so what we have here at the Great Salt Lake is you have receding water. And you have these stromatolitic mats. You can see these circles here. All of these circles were rings of communities of stromatolites. Each one of these was a stromatolite, and now it's dead, just like dead coral. So you have that exoskeleton left over. So some of these in these lower waters, as we get out here, they start to change color a bit. And they have a ring of cyanobacteria growing over. And they function as a community. Some of these, they look like seashells or they look like coral. Again, if you look at some of these circular patterns, these rosettes, and then how some of them are all pitted like this, all along the edge here. And again, it gets so mucky and briny out here, both from brine shrimp eggs, but also from the free-floating cyanobacteria that you can't see. But I hope you can see through this. You see little blobs, little dark spots. That's living stromatolites. We're mostly walking on the edge where most of this is dead, as it's been exposed to direct sunlight. But when you look out there, you see those dark spots. Every one of those dark spots, it's covered with a living stromatolitic mat over the top. Oh, a bunch of these are alive. These are just little ones. But you can see. Gotta be careful, don't want to walk on them. I am literally standing in primordial soup right now. A lot of people like to come out here and play in the water, and they don't realize just the level of microbial life that is here. And most importantly are the cyanobacteria that make up the basis of this whole ecosystem. Again, you're going from cyanobacteria to brine shrimp to brine flies, and then you're getting birds and the stromatolitic mats, and it goes all the way up through the food chain up here. But it all starts with these amazing prehistoric bacteria that we have right here. I'm thrilled that we got to see these, because stromatolites get me so excited. And again, our very life is entirely based off of the fact that stromatolites exist. If they didn't exist, humanity and all other life on Earth would not exist. This would just be nothing but just a volcanic, bombardment zone with nothing but volcanoes and asteroids and meteorites and no oxygen. But instead, this is what we have. So we have these tiny little microbes to thank for it. And I think that's pretty incredible. Look at this structure. Like, this looks so much like coral. It's just amazing. It's all pitted. And again, this is all grown by microscopic life. Microorganisms, so small you cannot see them with the naked eye, grew this structure. Just like bees growing a honeycomb, but on the microscopic level. In this stretch with all this red cyanobacteria, you can see that some of these little patches here, these little rocks sticking out. And again, this just looks like a bit of gravel, but that is actually stromatolitic growth. And again, it looks very similar to Shark Bay in Australia. Not quite as dramatic, but it's still really pretty and very primeval. Okay, you gotta take a look at some of these. These are dead stromatolites, but look at the growth rings. Look at these right here and these layers. And look at this piece. This is insane. Hope that's in focus enough. Hope you can see it. Just seeing those growth rings. And again, microscopic life laid out those rings and built that as a layer. That's beautiful. It looks like a fossil because, again, this is a life form that really hasn't changed in billions of years. Having come back now from seeing the stromatolites, this is the one that we picked up a piece, and looking it up close, you can see all the layers, and it looks very similar to this prehistoric stromatolitic mat. And on this side here, you can see these layers, and you can also see the red where it rusted because, again, this rusted the ocean. Now, there's another formation. A lot of people get confused with these. This right here is tufa, and it looks very much like coral. This is a rock. This is not organic at all. This is grown by capillary action, where a freshwater spring is bubbling up with immense pressure, and it's leaving sedimentation on the way out that grows in patterns, and again, looks very similar. So again, this was alive a few thousand years ago, even though it's a several billion year old life form. And this is its relative from several billion years ago. And this is a counterfeit that grows today just by minerals alone. And the first stromatolites discovered back in the day were originally thought to just be some sort of mineral growth like this. Well, let's go see if we can see some other animals on this island. So I'm out here close to the edge of the lake, and I couldn't help but notice there's a buffalo down there. Let's see if we can zoom in. Let me switch. It's kind of odd because normally you don't picture a buffalo or a bison just kind of hanging around in a salt lake. Now, he could be doing some grazing over there, but salt is an important mineral that we need too, so I think this buffalo might be doing a little bit of both. Bison have been around for millions of years. And bison we had during the Ice Age here, during the past 1 million years, we had 6 different species of bison in America. One of them had horns 6 feet wide. It's called latifrons. But one thing across the board that we find with bison is they leave buffalo chips. It's just like a cow pie, but it's buffalo poo. And as gross as this is, this, first of all, you can see little bugs around it. This is really important for the grasslands. Because what happens is the microbes break it down and they make organics on the soil. A lot of our prairie lands otherwise are pretty stark. And having the presence of bison breaks it down and makes organics that make it possible for the land to flourish. So in the absence of bison, much of the American West has had a hard time. Now, another thing about these buffalo chips is they're very good fuel. When they dry out, many of the tribes on the Great Plains use these as a fuel source. Where there's no wood out on the prairie, you just burn a buffalo chip. Buffalo crossing on the Great Salt Lake. Got a beautiful bison here, a couple of them, and unfortunately, we also have some humans who are wanting to get dangerously close. I'm not going to film them, but if they do something stupid, I might document it. Look at how powerful they are. Now the front, that shaggy fur, this is still the winter coat. The front of that is going to slough off over the next month and be very smooth and short-haired on the back. And that front will stay bushy year-round. This is a young one. Looks like maybe a 2 or 3 year old bull. But amazing to think that in this area there were herds of millions of them. And now we're down to just a few animals left. These animals almost went extinct in the 1800s. And here on Antelope Island is one of their last strongholds. So many ancient peoples, both in the Old World and the New World, relied on bison for food. A lot of people don't know that. There are bison also in Europe. They're almost extinct. They came from the same lineage as the American bison. But the European bison has become more of a woodland species, and it does as much browsing as grazing. But these species used to cross back and forth over the Bering Land Bridge during the Ice Age. Then species were able to go back and forth between what is now Alaska and Russia, Siberia. And in that way, you had species going back and forth, and then later on, as the ice sheets melted, then these species were isolated from each other and became their own distinct species. So the American bison is closely enough related to the European bison that they can still interbreed. So over here behind me, found a hacking tower, and this was instrumental in bringing the peregrine falcons back from extinction. Here in the United States, peregrine falcons almost went extinct. This was due to a pesticide, a poison called DDT. DDT seemed to be harmless to humans, but it turns out they'd spray it on the crops, little bugs would die, little from it, the birds would eat the little bugs, and then falcons would eat the little birds and it would get in their system. It wouldn't kill the peregrines, but it would make their eggshells so thin that they wouldn't hatch. And so you had multiple generations where the peregrines just tanked in America. Now, falconers got together and helped start the Peregrine Fund to bring peregrine falcons back to extinction. Birds that were kept in captivity already by falconers didn't have the DDT poison in them. And so they were able to lay healthy eggs. So those birds were reintroduced back into the wild in hacking towers like this one here. So what they would do is they would take baby birds when they're ready to go, and they'd put them there and they'd sneak up at night and bring food to the birds, but it gave the birds the chance. It was like an artificial nest that they could learn how to hunt and learn how to fly, but still have a guaranteed site to come back to until they got their strength and were able to learn how to hunt and do their thing. So hacking towers like this were instrumental. Now, that program doesn't use these hacking towers anymore, hasn't for decades, but those towers still stand. And what's happened is the prodigy of those peregrines will still use these. So all around the Great Salt Lake, there's these hacking towers. Some of them are starting to fall down, they're so old. But peregrine falcons will still consistently use them as a nest that are, again, generations down from those original that use these hacking towers. So it's kind of cool to see that and see that every once in a while we have something that happens where we're trying to save a species and it actually works out. So our efforts are not always in vain. Well, I just showed up now to an old farm, and I don't think this is active anymore, but it's an old historic farm. It's kind of a cool place. In the summer, they do a mountain man rendezvous here. But we're going to go take around and look at some of these old homesteading stuff here and take a look and see what it was like to live back in the old days. And I'm hoping we're going to see there's a pair of great horned owls and a pair of barn owls that nest here. So hopefully we can sneak a peek at some owls. There's some of this old farm equipment here. And you look at this, these used to be wagon wheels. You see, these are the spokes and the metal part is gone. But you think about how different a time it was when your travel equipment from this old wagon was literally made out of trees. But it's a hard way to work. Having to work the land is a way to survive.
Hello! I want to tell you about how great it is out here at Antelope Island and riding out the beautiful highway. We park up there by the marina and ride out in the wind and the sun. It's a great time. Beautiful Come and join us. Beautiful weather.
Well, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
There's a museum over there. It's set up as a living history location. We're going to take a look in the museum, see what we can find. So this is a normal saddle, and this is a pack saddle that you use on mules, and so that it bears all the weight, but you're not actually riding on them. This is a pronghorn, which is, we call them antelope, which is what the island is named after. There's a skull of a bighorn sheep. Pronghorns are really unique animals. They're actually related to giraffes. They're not at all related to the antelope of Africa. So this is a really cool species. These horns fall off every year, which is not normal. Normally an animal with horns, the horns keep growing and growing, but these horns shed off every single year and regrow. It's very unusual. They're called ostecones. Got an old spinning wheel and an old pot-bellied stove. And that would have been the way to keep your whole house warm and to cook in the olden days. This is a kind of yoke that you use to have like a mule haul. And here's a proper yoke. You put each of these over each side of an oxen, and they can pull a big old covered wagon or plow your field. There's all kinds of woodworking tools here. This is a hand drill. Down here you use this for drilling instead of a power drill, and these are lathes that you actually use as a planer. Not lathes, they're planers. Use these to plane wood and to flatten it out and make it straight, so you have nice milled lumber. There's a sickle, and pitchforks, and big old wood cutting axes for an axe like this. Well, not an axe, a saw. Wood cutting saws. You have a person on each end, and you pull back and forth, and you can cut down a tree. They shaped the entire world with anvils. For a community back in the old days, this was a vital piece of equipment for absolutely everything. To repair and to shape, you have to be able to hammer over an anvil. All these other different farm tools, wood saws, scythes, hammers, crimpers, wrenches, used to shape the world. Take a look at a sheep herder's wagon. And these are still used today, only with modern wheels. But we're going to take a look at this. This is, if you are out there and you're ranching sheep, this is kind of your world. You can see you have a place there to cook up a pot of morning coffee, cook you up some breakfast and a bed and back. Pretty simple living. But there's something to be said. I encountered a shepherd out in the desert a few weeks ago. And they were still using things just like this, but again, just with modern tires. You can see in this big barn, all up top, the places where the owls roost. Because anywhere they roost, there's tons of poop all through here. But this is more in the wintertime. You have the barn owls and the great horned owls come and roost in here. And in the summertime, they go out and hunt. We're gonna see if we can find some of them. Big grain silo here. And you can see a lot of droppings all through it. Down below, there are tons of owl pellets everywhere. I'm trying to zoom in on one of these here. So owls hack up. They swallow their food whole. They'll tear it up if they have to, but they'll swallow it up whole, and they'll eat the bones. And their body doesn't digest the bones, so the next day they hack up the fur and the bones in these pellets, and that's what those little brown things are. So owls definitely still hang out in here, but I don't see any at the moment. I do see there's a swallow nest. Hold on, light's kind of bad. Let me zoom out here. See, there we go. This is a barn swallow nest, and they gobble up little pieces of mud and dab it into that. And there's more. Let me see. Trying to get these in focus here. Let me zoom out a little here. There we go. Here's another one of these. So there's barn swallow nests in here, but owls definitely hang out in here too. But I'm not seeing any owls at the moment. I wondered if maybe this on the corner, it's so dark to my eyes, but it kind of seemed on that corner like that might be, it's blurry, but it almost looks like an owl's head peeking out there, but it's probably just another swallow nest. But not seeing any owls. Let's go see in the forest if we can find any great horns. Good looking horse. The weird thing about horses is that they're a novelty today. We come over and, we want to feed the horse and we love the horses. But this was just daily life for everybody. If you go back in time, not very long ago, everybody knew how to ride a horse. Everybody knew how to hitch up a horse. And now we pay money for the experience. It's like, what are people going to be doing in 100 or 200 years from now? Pay money to go ride a car? It's like, wow, a real gas car? Wow. But this was transportation. And we've been doing this for thousands of years. It's only in the past 100 years that we stopped. So again, horses were just such a part of life for all humanity. It's an old chicken coop. So in the old days, the chickens would roost on those poles at night and poop down below. And in the daytime, you let your chickens out to eat the bugs and eat the scratch. And they can come in there for water, but then at night, you have them in here so that they're safe from nocturnal predators, from foxes and raccoons and coyotes and weasels, mink, things like that. So this would have been a way of life for pretty much everybody back just 100 years ago or less. A lot of people are going back to it and keeping chickens today. So down below the old farmhouse is a cellar. It's a place where you can store your cold goods. You store all your jars of food. You grow your peaches, you bottle them up. And have a cold cellar. Maybe have some alcohol down there. Now we have modern day freezers and refrigerators. They have an area kind of set apart as sort of a nature preserve area. It's a set up of Audubon Society. And there is a kestrel. They either have a nest or they're mating. Oh, I gotta go see these. It's an American kestrel. That sounds like a baby. Begging for food. A nest. Male just went in. Male just went in the nest. I don't know if they have a baby or not. I'm gonna see if I can get a better angle on these. There's the male. It's America's smallest falcon. And he just flew out of the nest. I don't know if they have young yet or not. But falcons do not build their own nest. Most birds will build some sort of a stick nest, but they're just in a dead branch off of this hollow tree here.
Hi, I'm Will Williams. I'm a birder and a photographer, and nature and birding gives me a chance to reconnect to the land and my roots.
Thank you. So American kestrels are really fascinating birds. They are our smallest falcon in North America, and they mostly hunt rodents. Oh, there goes the female. So they like to hunt rodents, but they'll hunt birds and they will hunt insects as well. In fact, in the summer, they switch to almost exclusively hunting that. And right now, apparently the male and female are copulating and doing food swapping. So spring is in the air. But again, these are pretty common, but what's really neat about them is they can hover in one place. They can just sit there and kind of hover and keep their wings. Eurasian kestrels do the same thing. I think I got some clips of both American and Eurasian kestrels doing it. I'll put on this. But, oh, now they're mad. One of them's, they're being very territorial. Which is really exciting, makes it easier to find them. I'm on the edge of a wetland, and you could say, well, this whole area is a wetland. You're around a lake, but it's a saltwater lake. And so having a wetland area like this that is fed by a freshwater spring that then feeds out into the Great Salt Lake, which is salty, this is a really crucial habitat. And these dead reeds you see sticking out, these are cat-tailed tubers, which are a vital food source for a lot of animals. And then in the distance, these reeds you see, these reeds are called Phragmites. These are a non-native reed that are competing with the cattails, but they still provide a vital habitat. And I don't know if you can hear, but there's so many birds around here. And all of these species are relying on these wetlands. And again, this is a crucial site, which is why there's an old farm here, is because there's fresh water bubbling out from the ground and feeding down into the lake. Well, I hope you enjoyed coming out with me on this little road trip and checking out Antelope Island. It's an amazing place with a rich history and a lot to see. So until next time, I hope you always remember that life is an adventure. So never stop learning and never stop exploring. We'll see you next time.